Hello and welcome. I'm Barton Poulson. I'm so glad to have you here with me today, where we're going to talk about reducing, reusing, and recycling data. This is going to be a half-hour live office hour, and it looks like, even though it was supposed to be on Facebook, it's going to be on LinkedIn primarily and also on YouTube. And the first thing I want to do is I would love to welcome you. And if you can go to the comments, please say hi and tell me where you are tuning in from. I am in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the United States, and it is a beautiful day here. When this is done, I'm going to get on my bicycle and ride down to the train and go to my next gig. And let's see here. We have Sarah, who is coming in from Algeria, where it is going to be later in the day than it is for me. And Shivani in India, and Stephanie from Alabama. I'd love to hear where you're all from. I was looking at the list before we came and saw, yeah, there's a lot of people from parts of the United States where I am. Got Vera in California, and Sini Raj in Bahrain, and Stephen in Portugal, and Amr in Dubai, and our Canadians are being anonymous, but I'm so glad that you're here. And from Albania, New Jersey, India, Ohio, from Ibrahim in Scotland and Dubai. I've actually been to some of these places. One of the fabulous things about LinkedIn in particular is, and I can tell that everybody here is tuning in from LinkedIn, is that we do have this global community. It's such a funny thing after the pandemic, where everybody was locked into their rooms for about 2 years, to have that community developing and be able to reach out. We made what they said was like 10 years of progress on our ability to work online and to interact online during the pandemic. Well, that's a good thing. And I'm so glad to talk with you all. We also have people from Maryland and Saudi Arabia, North Carolina, New Jersey, the Netherlands, and Vitor from Brazil. Thank you so much for joining me. So this is another one of my short opportunities to discuss some of the things I've learned about working with data over, I don't know, I've been working with data for over 30 years. And one of the funny things, this theme about reduce, reuse, and recycle, this is actually something that's been on my mind for years. And it has to start with a slightly depressing collection of statistics. So I have a day job, and that is, I'm a university professor, and I'm going to be going to my school right after this, and that's at Utah Valley University. And I am trained as an academic researcher. I have a PhD in social psychology, which is purely a research field. I'm not a therapist, not a counselor. I studied really some of the cognitive mechanisms behind social conflict and ways of dealing with that. And I published about a dozen papers having to do with conflict and conflict resolution, specifically with mediation and restorative justice, and also did work on evaluation in the arts and other fields. And well, the sad news is, if any of you have an academic uh, employment, you may know about this. Most published journal articles don't really go anywhere. They don't accomplish a lot. There are two statistics, and I have the sources for these, so I'm not making these up. Number one, there's reason to believe that 50% of the articles that are published in peer-reviewed journals. So I'm talking about real journals, not the predatory, pay-to-play ones, but approximately 50% of articles published in peer-reviewed journals are never read by anybody other than the author, the editor, and the reviewers. And it just falls into a black hole. And so sometimes that's a few months of research, sometimes it's a few years of research, and it just kind of falls off into that. The other one is that 90% of published articles are never cited by anybody else. And so they appear to have, again, functionally zero impact. Now, I'm not saying this to pick on academic research, because it's just that that's where we have the data. I'm willing to believe, for those of you who have worked for various organizations, you worked in a large company, you've worked in a government office, you've worked somewhere, I'm willing to bet that you've done reports and they have gone nowhere. And you provide this data and nothing happens with it. And that is, it's depressing. And what it led me to believe, is that maybe we don't need all of that data and all of that work if it's not going to go somewhere. And so, when I'm not saying don't do the work. Mostly what I'm saying is focus on things that are going to have impact. And if you can tell that something's, if there are not strong indicators that what you're going to do is going to have impact, then maybe it's not the best use of your time or other people's time or resources. So let me specifically talk about these elements of reduce, reuse, and recycle when they are applied to data. Now, people are familiar with those terms, but they're familiar with them from, you know, like paper and plastic and metal. So use less stuff. That makes sense. Reuse what you have. That makes sense. And recycle. And in that case, it means, for instance, if you're recycling paper, it means that they're going to shred it all up and they're going to make new paper out of it. If you're recycling glass, they're going to melt it down and make new glass. It's a rather involved process. Here's what I mean with reduce, reuse, and recycle with data. When I say reduce data, what I mean is, don't gather data that doesn't need to be gathered. Don't gather it just because. Don't gather it if it's going to go into a academic journal or some organizational report and go nowhere. You want to do things that are going to have some impact. And I can tell you, there's a lot of academic research where it's pretty easy to tell ahead of time that that is appealing to an extremely niche audience, and possibly not even them. And there are times that you're working on reports at your work and you know that this is going to go on somebody's desk. They're going to quote it once in a PowerPoint, and then, my 6 weeks of work are going to fall over. And so don't gather new data if you don't need to. And usually, given these usage statistics, they probably don't. You don't want your work to fall into a black hole and go nowhere. I mean, I'm going to assume all of you have had experience. I mean, you can put a comment in here if you feel comfortable with it. Have you done data work and submitted it either to a journal or to your boss or to some other organization and have it go nowhere? I know I have. Um, oh, actually, here's an interesting comment. Vitor saying, could you use AI to read the forgotten papers and classify by area impact? Well, if you want to classify them by impact, most of it's going to be pretty close to zero. But yeah, you could read the AI. You could have the AI do it. That is certainly possible. But I also think a lot of the stuff gets not read because it is done in a way that was relatively hasty, and the methods are not always. A lot of the work doesn't stand up, and I think part of that is because when you do it, you don't have any real idea where it's going to go or what it's going to do, and so maybe it just doesn't get the quality there. Stewart is simply agreeing. He has had this experience of the work going into the black hole. Now, there's one thing I want to mention about that. About there's a reason not to do projects that are going to fall into a black hole. Aside from the fact that it uses your time, it uses your expertise on other things that can be done. So there's a significant opportunity cost. There's an actual financial cost to whoever is paying you. If you're an academic, the school is paying you. And if you have a research grant, they are paying that. And if you're working at an organization, they're paying you. And it's not really in anybody's best interest to have this research that goes nowhere. Um, but the one thing I want to say about that is you're using up goodwill. And that is when you gather data, you're getting it from people either directly or indirectly. And every time you ask somebody to provide you with data, you're asking them for a favor. You're asking them to do something for you. And if they're willing to do it, that's nice, but you need to let them know that what you're doing is important. You don't have somebody do you a favor and then take the thing they give you and throw it away. That's not cool. It's upsetting. You're not valuing their time. And it makes me think of my wife was filling out she's got an upcoming doctor's appointment and she was filling out the forms again, really endless forms. And I have filled out enormous amounts of data when I go see the doctor, and I am still not convinced that it reaches the doctor. I don't know who's getting this data or where it's going. I imagine a lot of it's for the insurance company. Um, but I don't even know that they use it all. It's hard to know what happens with the data, and unless that is becomes clear, then you're not making good use of people's time, and you're using up their goodwill, so they are less likely to do these things in the future. So, coming from a professional researcher and data person, I am telling you, don't gather new data if you don't have to, and if you don't have some reasonable degree of confidence that it's going to go somewhere. It reminds me Stewart may have been there when I was doing a video course for another company, and somebody asked me, "What superpower will we get as the result of participating in this?" And I said, "The power to say no, the power to say no to poorly designed and poorly organized projects that won't lead to anywhere. Take the time to make sure your work is going to have impact or that it has the potential to have impact, and that you, in an ideal world, you know specifically who's going to use it and when they're going to use it and how they're going to make a decision based off of it. That work will have impact. If you're putting something together and then just kind of tying it up and throwing it off into the ether, it's hard to know. And that's what happens with an awful lot of academic research and an awful lot of organizational reporting. Now, so that's reduced data, which basically says don't gather it unless you have a good reason to believe that it's going to have some impact, and don't gather more than you need to. I mean, if you can get what you need from 3 questions, don't ask 30, and certainly don't ask 300. Be a little more focused in what you need. But that's reduced. The second R from the is reuse data. And, obviously, if you've got data in your organization, if you've got data you've worked with before that is still relevant, use that. But what I'm really thinking of when I talk about this is open data, and that there are many sources um, that provide large, high quality, curated data sets that are waiting for people to use them. Um, they are usually hosted by government sites, and we have them here in the United States. I know they're in the UK. They're in a lot of different places where you can get these data sets that somebody has done the very hard work of getting representative samples of using standardized measures and getting hundreds or thousands of people to respond to it. Build off the goodwill of those people who provided that data. Use the existing data. Now, I would actually love to know, have any of you been able to use open data in any of your projects before, even if it's sort of a little project you were doing to figure out how to, like make graphs in Python or R? I would love to know. So put a comment if you have any experience with working with open data. Now, I will tell you, I do know one thing is it can be frustrating. It is sometimes very hard to find exactly what it is you're looking for, or when you get it, it's in a format that is difficult to read. And so there are challenges with open data, and I like to think that those things will get resolved, but I would love to know if any of you have experience working with open data, if you've tried getting on it. Um, so Siki says New York open data, IPUMS and RAND. Shoot, I've used IPUMS and I don't remember what it stands for, but I believe that's a kind of census data. What projects did you do with those? I've actually done contract work for the RAND Corporation. But I'd love if you could say a little bit more about that. Stuart says he's done so econ research gathering. In fact, it's almost impossible to gather your own economic data. You're going to be getting it from somebody else anyhow. Ibrahim, FAO data. I have to admit that the only thing that comes to my mind is FAO Schwartz, the toy company, and I know that's not what you're talking about. So, can you say a little bit more about what FAO data is? Um, okay, Stewart says his economics data was county and state revenue um, and tax data. That's great. You can also get things like some of the best known data sets that we have are about the house sales. That's a common demonstration data sets about the sales of houses and the prices and where they're located and a bunch of other stuff. And so using open data, stuff that is specifically marketed and made available, is going to be really a fabulous choice. You can make an entire career off of using open data, especially if you're in economics. You can do it. I used to joke about that in graduate school, said I was going to make my career without gathering any new data. That was just a joke. But you literally can do it in certain fields, and that would be a fabulous way to go. Grant agencies sometimes have reports. There are a lot of different sources. And so before you go start gathering your own data, especially if you feel that you need like a representative sample from a large population, see if somebody else has done it. This is actually very close to the advice I once read about starting a nonprofit. And the article was basically said, so you want to start a nonprofit? Please, please, please do not do that. They said, there is so much work involved in the formation and the organization and the maintenance of a nonprofit. And one of the things that's going to happen is you're going to be discovering that, administrative skills are not your strong point, even though you care very much about what you have. And they said, please, you want to, build on your enthusiasm for your topic at hand. But they say, but there's about a 99% chance you will be able to find another existing nonprofit that shares your interest and find a way to partner with them. And so what they were saying is, don't create a new nonprofit, hook up with an existing one. Again, reuse what is there. I think that is generally good advice. Okay, Ibrahim. Oh, okay. The FAO is the Food and Agricultural Organization Annual Fisheries Catch Data. That's fabulous. Thank you for explaining that. Again, that's going to be the kind of data that's nearly impossible for a person to get on their own. but they're going to be able to get some very high quality, large sample representative research from other places. So thank you for sharing that example. Um, and let me talk about the third R, which is recycle data. Now, that one might sound a little strange because, again, when we think about recycling paper or glass or something, it means like shredding it all up and melting it down and turning it into something else. We're not going to do that. We're not going to shred your data. But this is where what I mean by this recycling data means getting data that was created for some other purpose and then adapting it to your current project. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, there are important qualifications on this. But one example is, let's see here. In your own organization, you probably have data, you probably have web analytics data, and you probably have some data about the behaviors of the customers. It wasn't gathered for you or your project, and maybe they weren't specifically going to make it available just because they didn't know there was something else could be done with it. But if you have data in your own organization, by all means, find out what's there, go ahead and get it. Chances are somebody has gathered some data that's going to be relevant to what you want to do, and you can build on that. Another example is if you are running some sort of e-commerce site, or if you're with an organization that has online outreach, and every one of them should, then you're going to have a lot of data available to you directly through your social media channels. You're going to be able to do social listening. Obviously, you can see how many followers you have, how many likes, how many shares, and that's going to be relevant data. It was not necessarily created for your research purposes. You're adapting it. But the really good one is if you can see what people are actually saying. So this falls into scraping data, and scraping data sometimes is a fabulous approach. Sometimes it creates real problems. It used to be that everybody's favorite source for scraping data was Twitter, and Twitter, now X, has made that kind of impossible. Um, but if you have your own e-commerce website and people are leaving reviews on your website, well, that's data that you can use. If people are submitting some kind of calls or information, um, then that might be available. Now, Aditya asked a really important question. How do you balance recycling data with the privacy principle for consent for which the data was collected? Um, I've created entire courses for LinkedIn learning about all the things that can go wrong when people say, "Hey, it's online. I can just grab it and scrape it." Number one is you have to make sure that what you're doing is legal, meaning the actual government laws permit it. And that's going to vary from country to country. And probably the most important one for most people is going to be the European Union's GDPR, the General Data Privacy or Protection Regulation, which places very serious constraints on that. The UK has its own GDPR. States within the United States have their own, and so that stuff's going to be very, very important. And so I would never. You don't want to run the wrong side of those. Things get very ugly very quickly. There are also particular policies that they're not the same as the laws passed by the government. But again, Twitter X has its own policies about scraping data, and many others do. You can't get onto a newspaper site and scrape their articles, or to a dating site. You can't get on and scrape their stuff. That's not cool. It's against their own policy. And then the third one, so there's the actual laws, then there are the policies of the people who are hosting the data, and then there's also the public. You can think of it as a public relations element. I think of it in terms of being polite. Don't gather people's data without their permission, or in a way that wouldn't be okay. So, for instance, I know that if you're doing academic research and if you're out doing naturalistic observation, if you're going and standing on a street corner and counting how many people jaywalk, you can do that. You're out in the public. There's no expectation of privacy in that setting. On the other hand, following them into their work and following them into the bathroom to see whether they wash their hands after they go to the bathroom, there's an expectation of privacy there. And so I don't even know what the laws are in that situation, but I know that you've crossed a line in that one. Public behavior that has no expectations of privacy, fine. Um, and it's that's why I say the really easy one is if you are Amazon, go ahead and take all the comments that people leave on their reviews on Amazon. It may not work for you to go to eBay and get theirs, but you can certainly use yours. And sometimes you have a large enough data set already within your own situation. If you work for a healthcare company, you are going to have a lot of information that of comments and reviews that people sent. And under many circumstances, that data will be available to you. And so, yeah, I mean, I really do want to say what Aditya's um, consent is important. And again, for legal reasons, for being compliant with policy so you don't get banned, but also treat people with respect. But there are times that you can do that. It's fine to see what the attendance was at a soccer match. Um, it's going to depend exactly on where you are located in terms of which uh, laws are relevant and also what platform you're using, which policies are relevant. And then look at examples of what's gone on. And I'm just going to see here. Oh, Vitor says this. In the recent past, I pulled some data from stocks of Brazilian B3 market, and it was a little frustrating to find the correct metadata that could explain the data, and each accessory table was in a different format. It was very painful. Yeah, I've had that situation too. So even if it's open data, sometimes it's not well formatted. And I like to think, however, that that's a problem that will eventually get resolved. Um, our time is nearly up. Um, it's 10:27. We've got about 3 more minutes. And what I'm trying to say mostly is when you gather your data, when you do a project, try to design the project in the first place so that you have a reasonable expectation of impact. That usually means, do you know who is going to use it for what purposes? That's going to make a big difference. That way, you're not just generating fluff that's going to go nowhere. Can you design a project that's going to have impact? That's going to take care of the reduce. Can you gather your data in an efficient way? Like I said, if you can get what you need for 3 questions, don't ask 30. Um, and can you use open data? That's the reuse part. That's going to be great if it's available. And under certain circumstances, you can adapt existing data that was gathered for other things, especially if it's within your own organization. Then it is your organization's data and it's available. They just didn't think that, you hear, oh, um, one of the most interesting examples of one of those fascinating ones is you may be aware of epidemiologists who study the prevalence of diseases by analyzing the wastewater in the sewers. Um, yeah, once it's in the big sewer system, you can get an estimate for the population as a whole. You're not going to be able to trace it to an individual person's house or an uh, you know, individual person, but you can get an overall estimate for the area. And so that's an example of recycling data, getting data that maybe was created for other purposes. But again, that's done in a way that respects the privacy of what's going on. I had professor who studied illegal drug use. He had some very, very tricky methods that they had to use in order to make it so people felt confident that they were sharing information that would be private and was not traceable to the individual. There are certain things you can do. There are some important workarounds. But my whole point about that is sometimes there is data that is available and is ethical for you to use and it's polite to use it that will also answer your questions. So again, reduce it. Don't do it if you don't need it at all, or make sure you're going to have a project with impact. Reuse, if there are high quality curated data sets available, use those first. And then third, if you need to gather new data, see if there's a way to gather data that already exists in some way while being mindful of both the laws, the policies, and the common politeness that goes into things. And with that, our time is up, and I will be back actually in 5 days. We'll be doing another one on Tuesday of next week. And I oh, hang on. Let me just read this big comment right here. Siki, I'm sharing these resources for reusing data. IPUMS, the world's largest collection of census microdata covering over 100 countries, contemporary and historical. Use it for a replication project on a paper and advanced empirical method course. That's a fabulous example. Thank you. By the way, I'm going to be writing my monthly newsletter, and I will make reference to IPUMS into it. I'll talk about the same topic. And then the RAND Corporation used it for healthcare research on, and then New York City Open Data. Thank you so much for sharing those. I'll put those into my newsletter so people have those in another format. But that's exactly the sort of thing that I'm talking about. I value your data work. I want you to be able to do work that has impact and that doesn't waste your time or anybody else's, but uses your time and your expertise well. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.